when you're moving from place to place. Good morning, good morning, morning, good morning, morning.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Tobago Updates Television, and thank you so much for staying with us. We're just about 7:51 a.m., so if you're getting to work for 8 o'clock, you better be climbing the stairs to your desk. And if you're on a nation's road still, please drive cautiously and get there safely. All right, we continue conversations this morning, and we speak with Mr. Martin George, attorney at law and the president of the Chamber of Commerce Tobago chapter. Of course, we're talking all things budget 2025, and we have Mr. George with us this morning. Good morning, Mr. George.
Yes, hi, good morning to you, and good morning Tobago, and good morning also to Trinidad, because your show is broadcast quite popularly in Trinidad.
Right, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So we're coming straight out of the budget for fiscal 2025, right? And representing the Chamber of Commerce here on the island of Tobago, there are a few things that we want to talk about as it relates to the share of the pie for Tobago and primarily for development on the island of Tobago, and also as it relates to the businesses operations here on the island of Tobago. Just last night in conversations while they were doing the little review of the budget, I think Mr. Curtis Williams was talking about one of his concerns was the minimum wage. So we're going to start there and then we're going to build the conversation. We see the minimum wage moving now from $20.50 to $22.50. How does that sit with you and the business community here on the island of Tobago?
Well, the thing is, remember, the minister was very clear that that relates only to public sector workers. So it's the government who is going to be paying this increased minimum wage. So that obviously I think is good for the business community, because it would mean that there's more disposable income in the hands of workers who are part of the public sector daily paid system, who would be the ones who would be affected by the minimum wage requirements. So therefore, in that circumstance, I don't see that as bad at all. I see it actually as something good, because it's not going to be a burden on business persons. It's going to be the government bearing the brunt of this increase.
And while the government is bearing the brunt of this increase, do you not see an issue with, let's say, somebody working in the private sector and they're thinking, minimum wage with the public sector is now $22.50. Let me see if I can get in there, which means now that there's a vacancy in the private sector and now having to find workforce. You don't see that as an issue at all?
Well, the reality is that, people, in terms of their employers and employees, how you manage your workforce, it's a question of how you as a business person, how you as an employer, how you meet and treat with your workers. All right. So it may be that there may be other perks or benefits that you can offer. Maybe you can offer your workers additional time off, or you can offer them additional accommodations or allowances. Say, for instance, if somebody recently had a baby, they will have to be visiting the health center for clinic visits, etc. You could give them those as paid days off, that kind of thing. So there are many creative ways that business persons can use to compensate for the fact that, look, okay, public sector workers would have gotten this increase, but the government did not apply it to the private sector. So it's up to you, the individual business owner, to meet and treat with your workers and make that adjustment. I don't think that there is any great risk of any mass migration of workers from the private sector to the public sector as a result of this. First of all, I'm not sure the public sector has the vacancies to accommodate any mass influx of new workers anyhow. So, let's start with that. So if there isn't the, the need for it or the capacity to absorb, any large number of new workers, then, I don't even think the question arises.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you there in terms of managing staff and, ensuring that everybody's comfortable across the board. So, I can risk that topic because I feel as if that is a very, very, good response to that concern, right? So we're talking now about the business sector, the private sector here on the island of Tobago and budget 2025. What is your first response in terms of listening to the rollout of the budget? What was allocated to Tobago and how it will affect the way we operate and treat with businesses and transactions and stuff like that here on the island of Tobago?
Well, the thing is, I mean, while I understand the need, I guess, maybe that the Secretary for Finance has to make the usual noises and clamorings and, make the usual accusations. If we are to be honest, sober, realistic, mature about it, if you look back at the history, say for the last 10 years, you'd recognize that this is a pattern that has been followed almost all the time. So, in other words, your request is never fully granted. Let's understand that. And that is something that occurs not just with the THA. So let's not portray this as a Trinidad versus Tobago issue. All the municipal corporations, they submit their budgets. All the ministries, they submit their budgets. They submit what they want. And most times nobody gets all that you ask for. So it is something that has been happening for years, for decades. So, I mean, of course, you will make the usual noises and complaints, but the reality is that you did not realistically imagine that your entire request of 3.956 billion would be granted. If you understand me, you knew you'd be getting a smaller allocation. So therefore, what you would do as a mature and responsible leader is seek to start to make adjustments and arrangements to less. And, I mean, the reality is, even when you had the same government in power, both in the THA and in central government, we have seen in the past where even what their own party, requested from the THA, the central government never gave the full allocation. So let's be honest and mature about this type of conversation and stop trying to portray it as wickedness and spite and vindictiveness and I mean those things. I mean they make for good sound bites. I think the population is maturing beyond that type of empty rhetoric, which is really good for on the political platform. Right?
Mr. George,
Is what do you do with what has been allocated? Right? When you look at it, the majority of it is listed for recurrent expenditure. And that is the problem that I have been highlighting for many years. In other words, the THA needs to move beyond this model of just getting a budget to pay for bills, for goods and services. In other words, you could never grow an economy that way. In other words, if all I'm doing, so in other words, just think of it. Let's look at it from a private sector perspective or from a business owner's perspective. Say, for instance, you are running a small business, right? You have a little mini mart. You have, say, 3 employees. All right. And all your income each month just simply goes to pay salaries, to pay electricity, to pay rent, to pay for water, to pay for lights, to pay for air conditioning, to pay for, the people who have to service the equipment, your chillers, etc. Right? Then to pay for your goods and stuff like that. And then by the end of the month, you're left with zero. And then you start back each month the same way. You will never grow your business. Because the point is there's nothing for investment. And that is the challenge that I keep saying. In other words, the THA needs to look at it from that perspective and say, hey, listen, okay, all right, either I reduce my recurrent expenditure or I find creative ways to get direct investment for infrastructural development. Because if you don't do infrastructural development in a serious way, then your island is going to crumble all around you. And all you're still doing is just paying for, rental of trucks, rental of cars, paying for, hosting events. You're paying caterers, you're paying the food suppliers, you're paying delivery persons. That's all you're doing. You can't grow an economy that way.
While I understand exactly what you're saying, we want to talk about the shortfall. I understand and I know that you will never get 100% of what you ask for. It is obvious. We all understand this. But the conversation now is that the request was for 3.8 billion, and I think we ended up getting 2.599, which is a shortfall of 1.2. So how do you manage the shortfall of the 1.2 billion? You're working with 1.2 billion less than what you asked for. How do you manage what you have to reach your objectives, to reach your goals? And I understand the need for investment. I understand the need for increasing income so that we're able to reinvest into the development of the island of Tobago. But when you have a shortfall of 1.2 billion, from your standpoint, how do you suggest that the management of these funds, because this is where we are now, I understand where we need to be in terms of the investment aspect of it. That's where we need to be. But where we are currently is that we have a shortfall of 1.2 based on the projections that the THA submitted to the Minister of Finance for the budget 2025. How do you suggest, from your standpoint, the management, especially with development only having 205 million outstanding bills to be paid and the likes, how do we move forward from this point for this year, 2025, until we get to a place where we can encourage or attract investment on the island of Tobago?
Well, that's a question really for the THA to answer, because they are the ones who presented the draft budgetary estimates. So
Right, but
therefore, they are the ones who have to look at it and see, well, okay, what is priority, what is not priority, how are we going to, basically, you have to cut your cloth to suit the material you have, basically, if you understand me. So I mean, it's an exercise that they have to embark upon and they have to engage in. I cannot advise them to say, well, you should do this or do that or do the other. They would be the ones who would know what is priority. Of course, you have to pay wages and salaries and stuff like that. Those things are priorities. But then, in terms of other aspects of it, they will have to see where they're going to have to basically. It's like, listen, let me tell you, it's like running a household, right? You may be in a job and you may get a salary reduction or salary cut, all right? So then you have to come home, you sit around the kitchen table and you all discuss and you say, well, okay, look, maybe instead of having the premium cable service, we'll have to go down to the basic cable service. Instead of having, the high-speed internet, we might have to go to, the regular speed. It's just basic household management. And that's what is required here. And the thing is then, using that same example of a home, and this is what we do in our homes. All of us do this in our homes. This is how we manage. That's how we cut and contrive to survive. We make adjustments. Then we may say, well, okay, look, instead of going to the grocery and buying, green vegetables all the time, we're going to start a little kitchen garden in the back to, save money. It's just basic common sense, basic home economics. Remember, years ago, they used to teach that subject in school, home economics, to teach you all these things. Maybe they should bring that back, because it seems that our leaders have lost the sense or concept of that kind of thing, because, it's what you do with what you have. Let's remember the story in the Bible of the talents, where the owner gave 10 talents to one man, and he gave 1 talent to the other person. And the one with 10 talents, he went and just buried it. He buried the 10 talents. The person with 1 talent, he went out, he leveraged it, he worked it, he invested it, he reinvested, he cut, he contrived, he did everything to survive. And he was able to multiply his 1 and turn it into 10. And yet still the one who got 10 did nothing with it except bury it and then brought back the same 10 to the owner. So who would you want running your business more? Wouldn't it be the one who could multiply 1 and turn it into 10? And that's exactly the point. We have to start looking at things that way. I mean, of course, it doesn't mean that you are going to ease up on central government and say, well, give them a pass or give them a blight. No, of course, if it is that they have given a shortfall, then you make your point and say, hey, listen, this is inadequate because we had certain plans, projections, etc. And you call them out for that. So I'm not suggesting that we give them an ease at all. But beyond complaining, the next step is action. If you understand me, you can't sit down and be nattering and complaining and crying over spilt milk all the time. Get a mop, get a a piece of cloth and wipe it up, clean it up. Let's move forward. That's what leadership is about. Because let me tell you, you could have a crisis occurring, say for instance a natural disaster. What you're going to do? Sit down and moan and wail and be nattering about it. You get up and you say, hey, listen, okay, people, this is the situation we faced with. This is how we're going to deal with it. Work with us. We're going to try and get ourselves out of this crisis.
And that is exactly what the conversation was with Councillor Tashia Grace Boris just a few minutes ago. She said she's already moved on and she's prepared to manage with what she has available to her. Great. So we're looking forward to see how that is going to happen there. In terms of the business community and the things that were released for Tobago, let's talk about tourism, for instance. Hearing the minister saying that he's given Caribbean Airlines the go-ahead to get some more aircrafts. How do we get people to Tobago to spend? What we want to do is people to spend, right? We want the business community on the island of Tobago, of course, to benefit from the budget. We want everybody on the island, as a matter of fact, to benefit. But we're talking about the business community now. Local spending, domestic spending. We want people to come in and spend. Do you think that what was given in terms of getting people to the island to spend is sufficient or acceptable at this point in time to contribute towards the build of the business community here on the island of Tobago?
Well, I think you're making a major assumption there, which I am not sure is borne out in reality. The assumption being that if Caribbean Airlines gets more money and they purchase more aircraft, that Tobago and the inter-island route is going to benefit from it. That's a fallacy. If you look at what Caribbean Airlines has been doing, Caribbean Airlines, they complain about the Tobago route. They say that Tobago route is not profitable. They say that, even when people ask for more seats and they provide more seats, the aircraft are still flying at less than capacity. Let me tell you, Caribbean Airlines appears to have zero interest in really facilitating the Tobago route as a priority. And we have to understand that reality. And the government, being the sole shareholder of Caribbean Airlines, they are the ones who ought to set the policy to ensure that Caribbean Airlines delivers for the capacity needs of Tobago. But the government doesn't do that. They pass the buck and they say, well, we gave Caribbean Airlines more money for more aircraft. And what does Caribbean Airlines do? They are now flying to Tortola. They are flying to San Juan. They are flying to Dominica. They are flying to all other places in the Caribbean. So where do you think these new aircraft and the new monies will be funneled? It's not going to be Tobago. Tobago is not a focus or a priority for Caribbean Airlines. And we need to understand and recognize that. And that's where I say the central government is at fault, because they have not mandated to Caribbean Airlines to prioritize Tobago in that regard. And it's a management issue, I'll tell you, because for instance, if Caribbean Airlines were to manage their booking system and their recording system properly, all right, so in other words, okay, someone may book a flight and they may not travel. So therefore, in other words, somebody who wants to go to Tobago on that same flight may be seeing that the flight is showing full. And you go to the airport and you realize half the people didn't show up, didn't make the flight. So therefore, you are now running a plane with a lot of empty seats. And that's where the management problem is for Caribbean Airlines, because they should have dealt with it in a different way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree totally there with that because, you were mentioning earlier that these new airlines, they will not necessarily come to Tobago, and the fact that Caribbean Airlines has not prioritized Tobago as a route that they are, interested in. And so it has to become a conversation, as you mentioned, central government has to deal with it at the government level because there are things
Yeah.
that we have to travel into island for, especially persons from Tobago
That's why
having to go
people
to
have emergencies and all kinds of things. Yes. Just give me 1 minute. Let me just plug in my device.
so of course, persons, of course, in Tobago having to go to Trinidad to access services, emergency services, medical services, going to school, and even to get goods from Trinidad, of course, is very, very important that, the conversation is reopened where that is concerned and priority is given to Tobago on any given day that you could jump on a plane and say, listen, let me go and get this really quickly and come back. And there are lots of people on the island of Tobago who would want to be able to go to Trinidad and not think about the inconvenience of having to sleep on the airport because flights aren't running. And let's talk about that last flight. I think the last flight out of Trinidad is about 9 p.m. And when we have
Because
international
that 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 last flight was a lifesaver for Tobagonians. And Caribbean Airlines doesn't seem to understand that. Because let me tell you, if you come down to Trinidad for a 1 day trip to do business, to do an exam, to go for medical services, whatever, it is hell for you to fight up with that traffic to get from wherever you are back to the airport on an afternoon. And then when you have the last flight going at 8 something, 8:30 or 8:45 or whatever, right? You have to reach there for an hour before. It is very challenging because the thing is you're spending about 2 or maybe 3 hours in traffic fighting your way to get back up. So you take 3 hours out of your useful time. Whereas for that midnight flight, when you were coming up to the airport at that time, it's smooth sailing on the roads. So therefore, that late flight was so important. I'm telling you, you could get a full day done. You could get to the airport, you could get your flight and be in work in Tobago the next morning easily. Right?
eh,
So, I mean, these are things that Caribbean Airlines doesn't seem to understand or care about. And I think that we need to put the pressure on central government for them to ensure that Caribbean Airlines prioritizes these things for Tobagonians because it's absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Mr. George, in wrapping up, what are your overall feelings and thoughts about the budget that we receive for Tobago for 2025, and how do you think we can maximize what we have?
Well, the thing is, I think that, this requires the resilience and resourcefulness of Tobagonians, but we need that not just at the individual kitchen table level, which we as families, as members of a community, as members in a village would do. Okay, so in other words, you want to build a little extension to your house. All right, you decide to use Lenhan. You talk to your fellow villagers. You say, listen, I'm going and cook a pot and I need some help. We need to plaster this. We need to put on some bricks, and people come out, they offer their assistance. Listen, we have so many creative ways of managing more with less. We are accustomed doing that in our families, and that's why when our leaders behave as if they don't know about this kind of thing, it makes you wonder how distant they have become from the population on the ground. So we would want to see our leaders show that same sort of resourcefulness. And as I say, not excusing central government for the shortfall, but certainly at the end of the day, you have to say, well, okay, folks, this is what we have. Here's what we're going to do. This is our plan. We're going to work with it. We're going to need your support. We're going to need your understanding and encouragement, but we will find a way to navigate through this, deficit and shortfall to ensure that goods and services and the priorities for Tobago are delivered in a meaningful, substantial and sustainable manner.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree with you there, Mr. George. Thank you so much for gracing us this morning and having this conversation with us and bringing your strong opinions to the fore so that we can have a better understanding as to where we are and some of the things we can do to manage what is afforded to us at this time for this budget 2025. Do have a pleasant day and thank you again for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, and the president of the Chamber of Commerce here on the island of Tobago as we speak about all things budget 2025.